Hey everyone, welcome. What you see in these containers here is all the stuff that was harvested from my outdoor worm bag. And the worms were relocated to launch off the outdoor worm bag, what I now refer to as the version 4. But, if you follow that naming convention, then the version 3 is what was harvested. Worms hauled out to start a new system. And what they left behind was their, for the most part, castings. But there was also a great deal of material that would just never really classify as castings, stuff that would need much more time to break down, stuff like peach pits, stuff like peanut shells, pistachio shells, sticks and stuff like that. And it was especially these peanut shells, each of them like a little cubby hole that can store damp castings that would probably want to stick inside rather than shake loose and come out. So we had originally stored all this material together while all of this material here was still stuck to all of this large chunk material. So it just took a little bit of drying. We actually gave it a good bit of drying for some time. And then the other day we shook it all loose. So at this point, this is all the stuff that is now free of all the castings that have been caught up in it. And the only thing that prevented us from reuniting all these castings with these castings that had been separated previously was the fact that there's just a huge concentration of worms living in this stuff right here. And it seemed like maybe a quick harvest, a light harvest or something like that, would be an easy way to round up a bunch of worms and maybe then just throw those castings back into here and let this cocoon nursery system continue perhaps a little longer, and then start thinking about rounding up worms from here too. But then we'd finally be down to just one container that's serving as cocoon nursery, and whatever worms we could round up out of here would already be used to launch off a new system. And then this stuff's just got to go back into a compost bin or something somewhere to continue, because it's going to take a while. So I'm going to put on a glove and I'm going to get to work, and I'm going to be using a process that I've not used in some time, which is using the paintbrush to separate the castings from the worms. So let's get to work. I believe that using this green, slightly smaller than usual container than I usually I'll use a bus box, but this slightly smaller container I think might work to our benefit, so we can kind of keep things nice and tight. You can see that this is a considerably smaller container than a typical bus box that I work in. But you saw the white bucket. There's not all that much stuff in here, and the first thing is really just going to be to pour it out, because I don't think that there's any sort of logic to it, or if there's any advantage to doing it one way or another. I just have this feeling that the material is going to be littered with worms throughout, so it'll just be this gradual light separation. I don't know if I called it light harvesting, light separation, whatever, of getting the worms free of their castings. Got a little bit more left in the bucket here. Okay, I believe we've freed the last of the material from the white bucket here. Any more wormies left behind? Nope, we got them all good. There's a couple more castings. We could jiggle that out later, but this is all about getting the worms and the castings separated. And I was really surprised the first time I watched somebody do this on YouTube. Somebody grabbed a paintbrush and they gradually started using the paintbrush to do what I would normally probably do by hand, I guess. I don't even know. Usually when I do light separation, I'm just kind of using the tips of my fingers to do like that little brushing action. But with this stuff, it just gives so readily, so that if you do bump into a worm, chances are the paintbrush's bristle will bend and give, rather than trying to force the worm out of the material that it's in. And then it'll probably just grab a couple castings and nudge only those aside. So my idea here was to reinstitute the use of the brush for this exercise today. Didn't seem like a great deal of material that needed to be done. And it also seemed like it had the consistency and the flakiness to lend itself to being easily done this way. So the only part of this is that it is a little bit time consuming, since there is that part of it that does rely on the worms to react to the overhead light. So this top surface here that I'm sort of agitating a little bit with my fingertips will, it'll get depopulated gradually over a few minutes. And when it seems like it's mostly been depopulated, that'll be the time to skim a little bit of casting material from it and begin the process. So let's get started. Before I start into the brushing of stuff, I had this little idea here that I might be able to collect up the material straight into a little something that I could just immediately remove, not have to scoop it all out like I usually do. And let's see, I'd also like to hit the target. So let's see how this goes. Let's see how many castings we're able to pull off without disturbing any wormies or bringing any wormies along for the ride. I can also see a cocoon right there. Not sure if it was visible, but let's see. I guess it would probably want to, let's see, the worms will be here, the castings will be here. I guess it's not a worm. So it'll just go with the rest of the other castings into the cocoon nursery. It's amazing, like such a big difference in color too. The other one we saw didn't look nearly as dark as this one. It's just kind of cool that we're spotting some cocoons right off the bat there. So like there's another one that's like super light in color. So I mean, like, you know, theoretically when you're running a cocoon nursery, you've already removed all of the worms from the area that are old enough to populate, or not to populate, but to make cocoons, to, you know, to mate. So if you're keeping material around for the sake of allowing time for the cocoons in the material to hatch, but you've also got adult worms occupying that same material, well, it'll just become this sort of never-ending cycle where there will always be just new cocoons needing more time to hatch. So I think the whole idea of cocoon nursery is best when there's, you know, really no worms around. And that's what this stuff's going to end up being, but all that stuff in the all that stuff in that grow bag, now we've hit a worm that's going to need a little time to dive back down. Actually, I was thinking maybe putting the worms over here on the side so they could just kind of be down low anyway. Oh, here's a little tiny one. Itsy bitsy little worms. You know, worms this size, you would have to guess that over the past 40 or how many days, 45, I don't even know, since the version 3 outdoor worm bag was harvested, and we started into the whole concept of keeping this stuff around for cocoon nursery purposes. Well, yeah, you would have to think that that little guy that's that size would have to have been born here. If we end up, you know, skimming lots of worms, then it might be time once again to have a little pause and let the worms near the surface dive once again. Maybe I can also even just give the material a little bit of a jiggle, kind of agitate it slightly so that any worms near the surface will sense me there and maybe not dive because of the bright lights, but dive because they can sense an intruder hanging out nearby. So let's give it all a little jiggle, and we'll give it a couple more minutes and do another skim. It's usually during these time-consuming processes that you really start to notice things that you normally miss because you're kind of breezing through so quickly. But now I'm just like spotting cocoons all over the place. I mean, they'll get brushed over when I get my little brush going over here, but I'm just figuring I would grab a few of them just to get a little hands-on with them, check them out. But I mean, right out there on the surface to be able to spot 3 or 4 of them, and I probably have a couple more staring me right in the face that I'm not zeroing in on yet. It is kind of neat, you know. So let's do another skim. I'm going to be playing some of this footage back quickly later on, so I'm sure I'm going to see some movement in here that I didn't see in real time. Some little baby worms or something. Yeah, baby worms could be really tiny and hard to see, you know. It's easy enough to spot the big guys squirming around. It's the little ones that are a little bit more elusive. Cocoons everywhere. All different colors too, you know. Some of them are kind of like a more amber brownish color. The really new ones are got that really light, almost like a greenish color. Really interesting. The size differences are interesting too, you know. Some of them are obviously much larger than others. So I've just got to remind myself that these are just the worms that came out of my outdoor worm bag, and that bag was populated with worms that came out of my compost barrel, and those are all wildly, you know, occupying my compost barrel. No worms were ever placed into my compost barrel by me. And sometimes there's just so many of them in there that I go in there to, you know, to source worms for projects, like maybe starting an outdoor worm bag. For whatever reason, I didn't have enough worms to just relaunch. Maybe I don't know, maybe the previous version also ended up resulting in me bringing the wormies inside my wormery, and that's why we had to source worms from the barrel. And this go around, when we took the worms out of this material that they'd been inhabiting, all these nice castings, we used them to relaunch the outdoor worm bag. Same worms, but there are so many here, and you know, we thought about returning them to reunite them with the family, but that system, that outdoor worm bag's already got so many worms in it anyway. It doesn't need more. It does seem like we could probably collect up enough worms out of this stuff as well as out of the bag over there. Alright, let's get this little guy down low. I guess rather than, you know, being patient and letting them dive, I could always just snatch them out and set them off to the side. Let's see if there's any other little guys hanging out near the surface that I can help get out of the top layer that's going to get skimmed next. I got to kind of realign the angle here too, right? The level's getting low. I'm also running out of room in this tray, so perhaps we'll have to do an unload of this tray into the black fabric grow bag, give ourselves a little bit more room to work, but I think we could probably go one or two more skims with what room remains here. So now we can also kind of create ourselves a somewhat larger upper surface area here to skim off of. Let's give the wormies a moment to dive down and get out of it so we can do another skim. Not even really paying that much attention to how much time I'm leaving in between skims, but it's not much more than maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Hopefully it's enough to let the worms, you know, get down out of sight, out of the bright lights. I think just that first action that we took, dumping the white bucket's contents out into this green tub, I think that all must have just shook every worm in the system up, you know, so they're all probably on their guard. So I don't think there's any of them that are just sort of like, you know, asleep at the wheel, so to speak. I think they're all prepared to, if need be, flee once again, like they probably felt like they had to when they're being dumped out of their container. So I'm hoping for pretty fast reactions. I saw a little movement over here as a wormy. Give them a moment to dive further. In the meantime, we can inspect how this stuff that we skimmed looks. There's again another cocoon. Yeah, they're all over the place. So it would kind of be nice to have my cocoon nursery at that point where it really was just cocoons and time. And maybe no more, you know, no more worms of breeding age nearby to keep leaving more and more cocoons behind. I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile to kind of do a similar separation of the castings and remaining cocoons in that other container. It almost seems like, since we did do sort of a very quickie harvest and relocation of the worms from outdoor worm bag version 3 to current version number 4. We never took any time to really try to separate worms from anything either. So, I mean, yeah, so, some of them that were very easy to separate were the ones that were used to repopulate. And luckily there were lots of them. Lots and lots of them. You know, leading us to not feel like we need more from this lingering batch that are still just now hatching, or ones that were left behind. Whew, man, I think I'm out of room. This might be a good chance for us to sort of till up the top surface to disrupt things one more time. Maybe give us a little bit more space again by moving things over one more time. Give us room to bring that clear plastic container back over. And I guess while we're emptying the clear plastic container, we can give these little guys an indication that we're going to be back in a moment to take some of their lovely castings from them. So they should dive down one more time and try to avoid us when we come. So let's let that go for a moment or two, and then we'll pick up where we left off. I have a feeling if we take out yet again this much material, it's going to lead to much more interesting things. I'm curious to see how many worms are in here, because we saw a lot that seemed to be the ones that were part of the, I don't know, kind of the later stage screening of the material. A lot of the early screening, I would have to assume, accounted for a good number of little worms, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Just very curious to see how many worms we've got here. It did seem like we have enough worms here, at least a few hundred, with which we can start off a new bin. I got new bins sitting around that are a couple months old at this point. They were just built and they've been on standby all that time. A whole bunch of nice bedding and stuff that's been kept damp all that time. No food, just a bunch of really nice bedding. And, you know, these little guys have been living in castings only for the most part, because all that shells and seeds and stuff, you can't really consider that to have a lot of readily available nutritional value that the wormies can make use of, I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. So I'm sure these little guys are probably going to find a nice box full of fresh bedding to be like a super duper upgrade compared to what they're living in now. As much as we admire what they're living in now, it's, you know, super duper stuff for our gardens and our plants, but gotta keep in mind what it is from their point of view. Man, this is nice. I like the way this goes. Either I'm just missing them all, or we're very, you know, very efficiently using this thing to pull off castings only, and no worms from what I can tell. Lots of cocoons though. I see them all over the place. Yeah, I definitely see the value in letting this cocoon nursery thing continue. You know, as nice as all that material in that grow bag is, all those nice castings, I don't need them right away. I can certainly allow a little bit of time to see what becomes of all these cocoons that I'm still seeing here that evidently need more time to get to the finish line. I just keep wondering how much, you know, how much activity is in the stuff that I've already collected under the assumption that it's now worm-free. I guess we'll get a little glimpse of it in the video. But here I've got to just use my so-so vision to try to see if I could spot one if I manage to scoop one up. But ideally I don't even want to scoop one up. I'd rather just like spot them moving already, and that would just tell me that we've kind of reached that point that we want to stop skimming and let them dive further. So let's give this material a little bit of an alarm. Says head down, dive, dive. Okay, give him another couple minutes. Well, if we want to do another skim, I've got to tip this a little bit, I believe, because the rim of this thing is already now higher. So let's hope we can get this much material off the top. I look forward to looking at this footage here to see what that top surface looks like right before I start skimming again. Hopefully it's not still moving. But from what I could tell, we're doing a pretty decent job. Skimming only castings. Not seeing much movement. I mean, I'm not really taking a lot of time to look either. Just kind of assuming that with this gentle removal of what I think is castings and non-living stuff, for the most part, it's easy enough to, I thought I just saw something other than castings. A little worm in here somewhere. Yeah, they're tiny. Jeez Louise. Sometimes I wish I had a little bit better light here. So I've got to, you know, not be so fixated, because there's certainly no harm in having a couple more little wormies in here, because we'll have one more chance at some point in the near future to collect them up too, when we finally do a roundup of the worms out of the big container. And I've already gone ahead and dumped that previous box full over into there. And we're almost full here. I could see doing maybe one more skim, and that'll get us to the rim of this thing one more time for doing yet another unload. But you know what? Let's not do the unload. Let's do that right at the last moment before we do another skim, because other than looking at the material that we're trying to remove over here, watch for movement over here, this will also give us a view of what's happening here. So I'll empty this right before we do the next skim. Alright, let's empty this thing out, and I'm wondering if we're going to be able to even fit this thing in here for the next skim. It's getting to be too tall, and our little mound is getting to be too short. Well, yeah, we're definitely going to have to tip our container here a little bit to do our skim. Let's see how it goes. Just that when it's tipped over this way, it really doesn't have nearly as much capacity. We'll see how it goes. Here's a little lollygagger. Did I not leave enough time for these little guys to dive? Or maybe more optimistically said, maybe there's really no more room for them to dive into. Maybe there's just too many worms right there below them. Oh, that was a stick, right? Yeah, okay. Did we bring any wormies along for the ride yet? I'm just wondering how good we're doing, you know, in terms of excluding worms here. Somehow it feels like we're doing a good job, but I could be completely missing a whole bunch of stuff going on here right under my nose. But I mean, you would see some movement, I would think, right? Every now and then I do pause a little bit. It's always the cocoons I'm seeing. Cocoons, but luckily not any movement. Oh, I think I just brought over a little guy that was hanging out on the surface there. Took him for a little ride. Oops, almost got that guy too. Did I bring any others? It might be time for a pause one more time. Perhaps do another little agitation of the surface to help these little guys know that I'm near. Oops, oh boy. I just kind of bumped into a little, oops, I think I just saw another wormy over here. Let's get him back over. Maybe we could just do another emptying taking our time and letting these little guys dive one more time. Do we want to leave this on the video to see if any movement reveals itself? I might not be able to see it with the naked eye and remove the wormies, but at least we'll know after the fact, right? Okay, just a little agitation, loosen up the material, make it really easy to paintbrush off at the end. Ooh, I'm seeing lots of worms. We might be getting to the end of the line here soon. Alright, let's let these little guys dive. We'll come back and grab their castings after we do another emptying. Alright, well, this one certainly doesn't have nearly as much in it as the other ones had in it. But you know what, let's dump it anyway. Oops. Bringing it over to the bag. The bag's already over here in its location. You can see how the other two blocks looked when they got dumped out. So I'm dumping the third one. This doesn't look nearly like a block anymore, just a bunch of castings. But our collection is big. We got a whole lot of casting material in here. It's really nice. For what will likely be our final skim, the top. It's the top for the container. The container we were using up until now, its top is going to be the perfect thing for us to skim onto to make it really easy to lift it out of here. And I think I've made just the right amount of room for it here. And I wonder if this will be the last skim, or if we'll have to leave these little guys a little bit more time to dive down. Yeah, sometimes I wish I had a little bit more light to be able to just turn it on right now. At a time like this, it would be beneficial, I think. So here again, I think our worms have kind of gotten into reaction mode, so they're all pretty active, just waiting for the big bad monster to come get them. So I'm sure if they sense a little bit of brushing happening, a little bit of paintbrush happening right above them, they're going to sense that right away. So once in a while we might catch a little bit of a slower reacting worm. It does seem like we're managing to exclude the better part of them. Right? That's cool. Let's do a skim over on this edge. Let's see what we get. I keep getting this urge to like do a really aggressive hard skim just to reveal all the worm activity right below, because I know it's right there. Oops, see that? That's pretty awesome. I love that. I don't know why. It's so cool when you start peeling back that almost last layer to reveal almost only worms. So really like the way this paintbrush works, I gotta say. And look how nice, and you know, everything's nice and damp, but none of it sticks. It's like the perfect consistency to work with here. Keeping everything nice and comfortable for the worms, but also at the same time being very easy to manipulate and handle for this kind of work. Very nice. I'm starting to get this feeling like we could probably unload this lid, because we don't want to go overboard loading this thing up with material. We can do an unload here, and at the same time we could allow for a little bit more diving. Maybe we can do one final skim here. And I'm even wondering if, yeah, you know what? We'll leave the lid here so we can observe if we let any slip by. And if they did, we won't really see them. We'll see them on the video, but by then they'll just be of by then they will have already been emptied over into the grow bag and not kept with all their friends and cousins, but that's okay. We'll get them the next go around. Alright, let's get this lid emptied. Whether it's got worms on it or not, I was not watching. I'll get to watch it later on the video. you know, I can hardly resist the urge, and maybe I won't even resist the urge anymore. Maybe we'll give this thing a nice aggressive brush, skim, right until we can actually see worms moving. Let's just see what we can get. And then maybe we'll even pick worms out if we're being so aggressive that we're bringing a couple of little guys along for the ride. But I'd really like to get right down to where I see the worms, because you know why? Because I think that all the worms at this point are probably kind of mounded together and latched onto one another in this sort of defensive posture. So if in the process of what we're doing here we bring a couple along for the ride, then we should be able to see them, spot them, and pull them out pretty easily, right? But it does seem to me like we can brush pretty good, and they're all kind of hanging on to one another at this point. We're definitely bringing over some little tiny guys that just don't have enough, you know, length to be able to latch on to anything, really. Maybe I should allow more time now for these little guys to dive further. And, you know, I always like this idea of leaving behind the stuff that we're now treating as wormless to see how true our claim is. And we can give this stuff over here perhaps one last little agitation in the hopes that we could just kind of get it down to almost worms only. It'd be kind of cool. Might be time to actually reconfigure this pile too somehow to sort of let a lot of this casting material just shake right off, assuming again that the worms are going to hang on to each other. But let's let these little guys dive a little bit, and then we'll empty one last time, then maybe we'll pile up. Let's get this emptied and maybe one last skim, and I think we're almost there, right? So I think our next step is going to be to mound this stuff up so we can sort of let a lot of the castings just, you know, flake off on their own. And then we'll get a much better view of what we really got here. Let's maybe just start by separating it from this far wall. Here again, I guess we might still have an easy opportunity to skim the top surface right now, since it's been a couple minutes and there's been a little bit of depopulating going on here. But I guess what prevented me from doing it earlier was what appeared to be a worm out on the surface here, but I don't think that was even a worm. So again, I'm still sort of counting on these worms sort of all grabbing onto one another. That's probably why they didn't leave behind any friends or relatives, so they're all still kind of part of that jumble over there, right? Yeah, why don't we try to do one more semi-aggressive skim, see what we end up with. Do we want to skim onto the plastic? Yeah, why not? Easy enough to just bring it over, right? Let's see what we get. At this point, I'm going to be kind of aggressive, and we'll pick out worms that came along for the ride by accident. But I think this way we'll get a large amount of the castings off these guys. And I'm wondering how many we're going to need to pick out, or if this is going to need to become its own kind of light separating pile. I don't know, is it easy enough to just individually grab a few? Here again, you know, it doesn't have to be 100%, because those castings in the grow bag are also going to have to go through a similar roundup to get every worm that's in that material out too. So if these little guys make it over there rather than being here to be relocated into a nice new home, it's not a problem. We'll get them the next time. Yeah, how many did we pull out? We pulled out maybe 4 or 5. Wow. I don't think we missed any, did we? Nope. If we did, they're not really very mobile. They're just kind of sitting there, laying low. But it doesn't matter. Let's empty this thing. All right, I kind of got off into La La Land thinking about how am I going to perform this next step, and my thinking was reconfiguring the pattern. I think I'd like to make it more of into a mound that I just really kind of squashed together into one, but I also don't want to pass up on this skimming opportunity right here before we do that. Whatever we skim here, if it's really full of worms, maybe we could just throw it right on top of the consolidated pile. If it's only a few worms we can pick out individually, maybe we'll just do that. So let's see if I could be delicate here. I'm kind of quick about it. I figured if this stuff was really, really loaded with worms, we could throw it right on top and then they'll dive and leave it so we can actually do a skim where we've got a chance of freeing it of all the worms. But here again, if we've only got to pick out a couple, perhaps we've got another load that we could simply dump over into the grow bag. And not even worry if we let a few go here and there. I would say in general, we're doing a pretty good job. It seems like we're missing very few, or at least to my so-so eyes. So much stuff always reveals itself in the video later. So let's see if we can get this consolidation taken care of here so that I can go dump this tray or top or whatever, this lid. These little guys are real quick about diving down too, right? But I guess here's where I was sort of thinking it'd be sort of nice if we can see a lot of the castings just fall away as a result of us picking up this kind of interconnected pile of worms here, which is, yeah, still got a little bit of casting material in it, but not a whole heck of a lot compared to what's here, which is basically where all the castings are. And these little guys will dive a little bit further. And I'm just wondering if now's the time to bring it all back together so the skim that we do is really just one single skim for this stuff that's more or less worm-free. But it'll be a little bit more worm-free in a few moments. Alright, we're going to go empty that tray lid and maybe one last skim, and I think we're close to being done. Wow, you gotta admit, I think I only gave them maybe a minute and a half or so, but they really got out of view fast. It just feels to me like if I were to skim now, though, it's still too early. The ones that just dove down, I think are still just kind of getting situated down into the big worm pile in the center. But I think if we give this a few more moments... Oh, there was a couple worms too that were stuck to the to the plastic lid. Two of them exactly, but the other one was larger, so I think he already dropped off before when I started skimming, but then I figured that little guy would be stuck, might not get skimmed off so easily, but I think I got them all now. Alright, yeah, I think I'll just let this thing sit for a few minutes. Let them squirm to the middle. Maybe I could do one more last skim, and then I think we're just going to leave it at that. We're not going for 100% here. Well, I was able to observe a few little straggler worms that could easily get left behind. So let's see if we can get them reunited with their family before we get this whole worm haul out completed. This little guy I don't think was one of the left behind. He just voluntarily left on his own. This little guy seems like he would have eventually found his way home. But there was another one that I thought I saw somewhere over here, a really tiny little guy. See if we can get them back into the game somehow. But you can already see how just the movement of the worms beneath the castings is causing the castings to sort of flake off in little chunks, like little parts of an ice shelf or an iceberg, kind of breaking off as it gets depopulated and all the worms exit. I'm wondering if we could just leave this for a few more moments and maybe we won't have any more little stranded worms out on the plastic. Maybe we'll have pretty much all of them in the little central worm ball, and maybe we can even do a final skim of these castings if they're just going to flake off in big chunks anyway. And I think I better go get their new home ready. Alright, it does look like we could skim a little bit off, and at this point I'm going to skim, pick out any worms that I skimmed off by accident, get them back into the pile, and then I'm going to transfer them over first onto the scale that I've got right here on standby. So we'll give this container a quick weigh. Let's see, right now it's going to come up with, what are we, 0.02, I believe this is on the kilogram setting. And now that's just teetering somewhere between a half an ounce and an ounce. If it's so close to an ounce that it sometimes shows an ounce, maybe we'll just assume that we've got an ounce here to deduct from the overall weight. But I think it's time to get these little guys free of their lovely castings, what little bit of the stuff remains here, so we can get them out of here. Get them situated into a nice new bin full of fresh bedding. There's been no food put into the bin that we're going to be putting them into. The bin was just built with a bunch of fresh bedding. It's been sitting around for ages, and it's about time that we put some worms to work in it. And at some point soon we'll probably have to put some food in there for them as well. So I don't see anything moving in the stuff that we shoved off to the side. We'll be able to look again later and reunite anybody that got left behind by accident. If they do get left behind, it was certainly by accident, unintentional. So I would have to say that the percentage of worms to anything else that's here in this pile has got to be pretty high. I would have to say that whatever weight we come up with, it's got to be more than 95% worms. A little bit of extra weight for the castings that are stuck to them, but hardly anything other than worms in here, right? So and we'll come back in here. Oh, I thought I saw something else moving. I'll collect up anything else that stayed behind in a moment. But why don't we get this container over here so we can figure out what we got. A lot of times we just do an estimate based on visual, you know, just a count of how many worms we think we've got. But now we can actually go to some sort of a weight here. What do we got going on? This thing on? Do I have to zero it? Is it complaining because it's not zeroed? Alright, so I'm not sure if it's whatever it is. If it was an ounce before and now it says 4, we're going to say we've got ourselves 3 ounces of worms here. Right, so that's not bad. And I don't think I see any more of them. Oh, I do. Got a couple more. Let's see if the scale changes. It's not gonna, that's for sure. So I can take care of returning the last of those little bits of castings that we brushed off these guys a moment ago to the fabric bag. But that's not too interesting. I think what's more interesting is getting their bin ready and releasing them into their new home. So let me take care of a few things really quick. And while I'm doing that, these little guys over here can keep you company. Alright, I've got most everything ready to go. Yeah, not bad. Let's let these little guys loose in their new home. These here wormies, I bet you they're ready to get the heck out of this round container and into this nice fresh bedding. My pre-made bin, it's been sitting out here for a couple months now, was almost in a ready-to-go state, but parts of it were very dry, so I went through and I stirred everything to equalize the moisture, and I added a great deal of moisture to compensate for the dryness, and I took a few minutes to fashion some top coverings that we can use once we're finished releasing these guys, but let's not wait any longer. Let's get these little guys released into their new home, and then we'll be finished. Ooh, I saw one little guy down here. Let's make sure he's included in the fun. We'll try to spread them out. Maybe we'll be able to get a slightly better view of how many we've actually got here. And once they settle in, we'll get everything around here cleaned up and put away. Yeah, there's some deeper sections here. Alright, let's leave them be. Well, that was fun, and I'm glad it's done. But before we wrap up here, it's funny, sometimes I'll build a bin. So like, 50 whatever days ago when I built this bin, I might have included some foods, but I didn't in this case. Other times I would launch the worms into a system and then wait. Not add food yet, come back a week later or so. Let them have the bedding to feed on in the meantime, but I don't think I've ever actually fed a new bin that didn't have food built into it on day one. But I do have a material here. It's my worm chow, which would lend itself to an easy application. I was going to sprinkle some grit in anyway, and I was also going to sprinkle in, or drizzle in, some of this BTI solution. So why don't we just go for it? We'll sprinkle in some of the BTI. I'm not going to dump it all in. I've already started with the application of BTI into these newly built systems. I'd already put some in here once before, but what the heck, let's put some more in. All the moisture that I used to try to rehydrate this system, or at least the parts of it that were getting a little dry, I just used regular water, not the BTI. So hopefully we won't see too many flying insects going around in this system with the BTI being in here right from the get-go. And this stuff here, this worm chow, it's ground up seeds, ground up grains, and I think what we've put in here is a pretty good feeding. Should be an interesting first feeding. And I just got this feeling like we're going to have a whole bunch of nice castings all over the top here when we check in here next time, whenever that may be. A lot of times I try to build up suspense before I check in on my newer system, so who knows, we might end up leaving this thing to sit out here for a week or more before we finally come back in here to see how things are going. So hopefully we haven't loaded ourselves up with some sort of a ticking time bomb here. I think everything's in good shape. Everything should be pretty cozy for these little guys. Before we put them up on the shelf though, we've got a little matter of tradition and business that we need to take care of. We've got to christen our new bin with today's date. Usually I just write the date, not the day, but since it's Friday the 13th, I figured I'd include Friday in there too. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Got a few things I've got to put away and clean up before I can call it a day. I'm not going to keep you around for that. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.